when I think about challenges that are being faced today, I would say there are what I would consider more superficial challenges. And a lot of people might disagree and say those aren't very superficial, but I think there are, of course, things like what's going on with the global economy, with recession, with supply chain. We're still emerging from the pandemic in certain regards. And all those, I think, are creating challenges for procurement. But I think those are not the challenges that, as a procurement leader, I would be the most focused on, because I think they are more tactical and perhaps less strategic. I do think that the bigger challenges are ones like talent, both retaining your current talent and finding talent in procurement and strategic sourcing based on where we need to take the organizations and the function and the industry. And that talent looks different than it looked 10 years or 20 years ago. And so I think that in and of itself creates one of the greatest challenges for procurement leaders is, how do I retain talent? How do I continue to evolve the talent that I have? And how do I attract new talent in what is an increasingly competitive marketplace within our industry? And then I would say the other biggest challenge in my mind is both the pace of technology and the fact that the landscape of technology is just full. By that I mean there are so many solutions, both broad suite type solutions as well as niche solutions that really create a dilemma almost for procurement leaders, and not just for procurement leaders, but for organizations to say, what's the right solution set? How do I truly know not only what the best of breed is, but what best of breed matters to me, and what other best of breed solutions might be nice to have, but not really critical for the organizational success. So I think those for me are the biggest challenges that we're faced with today. If you really look at this, the talent dilemma that we're faced with, and then this plethora of solutions, how leaders in organizations and procurement as well as finance and others, they really need to look at what solutions am I choosing for my organization, and then do I have the talent? Do I have the team that has both the technical and functional understanding of how to maximize the value from those solutions, but also do I have team members who have really the aptitude and the flexibility and the agility to adapt and to embrace the technology and not just use it, but really to maximize the benefits from it, and to get sort of the adjunct benefits that you find when you can really embrace technology and let it become part of your day-to-day sort of DNA of the procurement department. I think that as I think about the components of a successful strategy, I look at it first in terms of sort of if you think about building a house, that I've got this foundation, and at the foundation of the critical components, they're the things that I think we would probably all agree, are on everybody's list. It's things like, do I have a good category structure, category management? Do I have a way, the tools as well as the nomenclature and the data organization to do spend analysis? Do I have the kinds of tools that let me have access to and outreach to all the right suppliers, those that I know about today and those that I don't yet know about? But then as I think about my house, and my analogy may fall apart here, but as I think about the house and building it, then I start to think about what's the structure that I need in my house? How many rooms do I need? Based on where I live, do I need a house that, I don't know, can withstand high winds? And in the analogy, that to me says, do I understand my business? Do I understand both the company that I work for, the company culture, the company's objectives, but also how does the company sit within its industry? That can be both geographic, geopolitical, as well as, am I an emerging player? Am I an established household name player? So understanding my organization. And then at the top of the house, you have the roof. And that to me is really the most critical thing that you have to figure out and define as you build your procurement strategy. And that is, what do I need under that roof? What are all the partnerships? What are all the relationships that are critical for my organization to be successful? And that includes both, so of course, supplier relationships. And again, those are the ones I have today and the ones that I don't yet have. And then the internal stakeholder relationships and partnerships. Because without having both sets of those partnerships, relationships under your roof, and having those now sitting on top of the support structure, the foundation, and the house design that you've built, you're not going to be successful. As I think about it, I think it goes back to a little bit of what I mentioned about what forms a successful strategy, and that is that procurement or any department shouldn't really set their KPIs and their metrics in isolation. They've got to set them in the context of the organization's goals and what the corporation's objectives and sort of overarching direction is. And then procurement can set KPIs that support whatever your organizational objectives are. And that includes, that can include everything like objectives for ESG strategy. It can include objectives for financial performance, for shareholder return. There can be any number of things, supply chain resiliency. Those are all once you understand what your organization, what the company is trying to achieve, then procurement can define goals, KPIs, and metrics that support that. And then underneath all of those, create very specific targets for things like supplier performance, cost savings, other value add, risk management, and then at the next level down from that, creating individual performance objectives for the team members in the procurement team. All of that together, I think, then brings you back to having, being able to measure success against things that benefit and benefit the organization and satisfy the overarching corporate goals. When you do that, and you do that successfully, in my experience, you then have created this I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase it. You've created a sort of a dynamic feedback loop between the organization, your internal stakeholders, and procurement. And so you're constantly measuring your success from a procurement standpoint in the context of your stakeholder partnerships and the overall corporate objectives and goals. Technology's role in procurement should not be seen as sort of the be all and end all, but rather that it's a means to an end. And I think that technology, of course, does the kinds of things that we'd all expect. It reduces manual tasks. It helps streamline processes. It gives you consistency in process, eliminates human errors, cuts down, cycle time, etc. Those are things that I think we would all agree are kind of, if you can't get that from your technology implementation, you probably have a poor implementation or you made the wrong solution choice. Where I think the real role of technology and the real benefit of technology for procurement is in terms of how does procurement bring greater value, continuing to expand the value proposition that procurement brings to an organization, to the company, to the stakeholders. It's about that total cost of ownership, which is much more than, can I reduce purchase price on an individual item, on an individual order? It's really about total value. And that value also includes things like, how do I manage risk for the organization? And technology, I think, in my experience, and it may be a phrase that I've heard from somebody, so I apologize if I'm quoting something here. Technology done right, for me, means that you are bringing increasingly added value to an organization while managing the risk, and all the while staying nimble and agile enough to meet changing corporate goals and changing industry and external being able to respond agilely to external factors in your marketplace and in your supply chain. How do you keep yourself both in tune with your market or markets? Could be more than one. And how do you leverage procurement and sourcing as a way to keep that market relevance and competitiveness? I think it's a really hard one, and it's one that, in my experience, a lot of companies don't figure out, and therefore they just ignore it. And that, to me, is by the way, a really risky proposition in terms of how does procurement help a company stay relevant and stay competitive in their market. I think that one of the biggest ways is that procurement, more than many other departments other than perhaps your customer-facing sales organizations, have a way that they're in a position to keep their finger on the pulse of the industry you're in and the industries that you interact with and that become part of your overall business ecosystem. And part of that is because procurement has, of course, the interaction with suppliers, and often the interaction with a multitude of suppliers through a supplier network. So I think procurement has the ability to gather data, either directly or indirectly, from suppliers as a part of the sourcing process and as a part of your category management process, that then can give you data for things like market trends, can really become a baseline for benchmarking. And that, in turn, again, surrounded by the right tools that let you access data from your suppliers, let you receive data from your suppliers, and do so in a pretty seamless and not labor intensive fashion, then lets you be agile. And when you can be agile with that data, then you can be, I think, pretty quickly responsive to market trends. You can see indicators that are foreshadowing of market changes, sort of, starting to feel the wind shift, if you will. And then how do you need to adjust as those changes in your industry and in the marketplace as a whole, as you see those kinds of changes occur. I think that all of this together lets procurement be in a position to be sort of, and I used the phrase earlier, this continuous feedback loop. This one is with your industry, with your suppliers, with the industry you operate in, and very often getting data that gives a company insights about their competition and lets you stay sort of one step ahead of the game in terms of being agile and responsive, and if not responsive, proactively reacting to potential changes in your industry. It's a great question, and I guess I don't mean this to sound like a sort of a cheeky answer, but it starts at the top. And in order to incorporate sustainability, all the ethical considerations into your procurement strategy, in my experience, it has to start at the top of the corporation, meaning well above procurement. It has to start in terms of sometimes at a shareholder level, at a board level, that the company says, here's what our goals for ESG are, and here's why those goals matter, and here's how we are going to, as a company, demonstrate and show and articulate our commitment to ESG. If you do that, and if that's done in your company, then for procurement, it becomes, frankly, as much tactical as it is strategic, because then what procurement is doing is saying we are building procurement strategies and tactics that support the corporation's overall goal direction, that are supporting the cultural commitment that our company has made to ESG. And when that happens, frankly, procurement's job gets pretty easy. And I don't, again, not trying to be flip with that answer, but not easy in the sense that it's not easy to build a successful ESG program, but it's easy to have the foundation that the company is giving you in terms of their commitment, so that it doesn't become just a tick the box exercise that some companies do with ESG, but rather it becomes, this is something that as a corporation we're committed to. And therefore, when procurement says, here's a strategy for embedding ESG into our category management, into our supplier reviews, into our supplier selections, and into the way in which we view suppliers and their proposals as more than just price per item or commercial terms. When you've got that company background, when you've got the company commitment, then when procurement comes up with these with their own strategies, they're supportive strategies to the company's overall goals. And procurement then doesn't have to spend, I would say, time and cycles trying to get the internal stakeholders to embrace and agree with an ESG strategy, because it's not just a procurement strategy, it's already a corporate strategy. And if done right, the whole company is on the same journey towards embracing and really infusing ESG into the DNA of the company and the outputs that the company gets from the interactions with the ESG programs. I think they can, and I can think of a few examples of companies I know where there was where the ESG strategy started with procurement. And as procurement was able to show really the TCO value of an ESG strategy, that that energy and that value statement from ESG flowed upwards to the board level. And then from there, it didn't just come back down to procurement, but it spread horizontally out to other areas of the company that not at all procurement related, where ESG became, for example, part of maybe a marketing approach, became part of a public, corporate philanthropic activities. But that the original impetus started with procurement embracing ESG as a procurement strategy, and then the value from that, which could be, again, if done right, absolutely can be quantified and communicated throughout the organization, but most importantly, up to the C-suite, up to the board, who then saw that value and embraced it and frankly magnified it and expanded it to be broader than just procurement. I have seen, both in my experience as a chief procurement officer and also now as a consultant, that so many companies overlook, or they sort of look past it. They think, oh, this is no problem. I got my strategy. Great. We're on the way. And change management to me may be one of the single most critical factors for success of a procurement strategy. And likewise, it can be probably the single biggest, in my experience, risk for failure of your procurement strategy. And so if I think about what does that process entail, it actually, for me, starts way before you say, here's my strategy. It starts at the, as they say, it starts at the beginning. And the beginning is, before I create my strategy, I have to have identified who are my key business stakeholders. And I have to have begun, I may not yet have developed, full trusted partnership relationships with those stakeholders, but I have to I have to have identified my key internal stakeholders and begun to build the bridges of partnership, begun to establish the relationships with them. And in almost every case, those relationships are not just one-on-one with your stakeholders, because rarely do you ever have just two parties, procurement and the stakeholder. You have a procurement and several stakeholders who are woven together. For example, your relationship between procurement and IT is not just procurement to IT, because you probably have a relationship that has to be that's part of this, that's another touch point with operations, and very likely with your risk department, maybe with your InfoSec department, certainly with your finance department and with your legal department. And the next thing you know, you've got this little web of relationships. So this in fact now says, I don't have a relationship with a key stakeholder. I have a number of relationships with various stakeholders that form a cross-functional team. And so this all needs, in my experience, to happen before your strategy really gets developed, because your strategy has to be developed, should be developed in in reaction to and in support of the business goals and objectives of your stakeholders. Because at the end of the day, procurement is a service organization. And I don't in any way mean to make light of procurement's role and value and importance. I've spent my whole career in procurement, so I'm not in any way downplaying it. But were it not for the business requirements of a company, there'd be no need for procurement. We wouldn't need to buy anything. So procurement needs to create their strategy in support of the business's goals, the organization's direction, the journey that the organization is on. And then procurement strategy becomes a support and an enabler and an amplifier for all of the organization's strategies. Once you have established your strategy, which of course, as I said, in my mind, is predicated upon having these cross-functional relationships, then it's communicate, and at the risk of saying it, over communicate, keep communicating, because that communication allows you to stay in touch with where each component of these cross-functional teams are running into challenges, where they're having successes, and where they or the external factors that they have to deal with are hitting change, hitting change, and having to deal with change, whether it's change in supply chains, change in new regulatory requirements, statutory requirements. If you have this culture of communication internally and externally with your suppliers, you're much more likely to stay abreast of, and maybe, if you get lucky sometimes, ahead of change, and being able to react to change before those changes become problems. And I think another couple points is that I've seen that are keys to the change management process is celebrate your successes, sometimes even small successes, and in your company culture, this may be a real celebration. I've been with companies that ring a bell. That was back in the days, of course, when we were all in offices all the time, but communicate successes, both success at a personal level and an achievement at a personal level, but also at a department and an organizational level. And that's where tracking things like KPIs becomes so important, because it gives you the data so that those successes can be quantified and tracked and celebrated. And the other thing is, don't hesitate to communicate the lessons from your missteps. And I call them missteps as opposed to failures. Sometimes they are indeed flat out step on the landmine failures, but more often than not, they're stumbles, they're toe stubs, they're little missteps. And being able to communicate those, to own up to them, for them not to be seen as a bad thing, but rather to be seen as it's a learning experience, so that organizationally and within organizationally, you don't make the same misstep again. And then to take the opportunity to say, what can we learn from this? And what we learn from this shouldn't simply be step over the crack in the sidewalk because we know there's a crack there. It's, how do we fix it? Can we fix it so there's no longer a crack there? That may be building a new route, creating a new process, or it may be smoothing out the process that we've got, making it more efficient, looking at the tools that we have, looking at new tools that may let us be more efficient and more agile. And so I think that being able to communicate not only your successes but your missteps is all part of this change management process that needs to be embraced and really almost exalted by companies. I think about looking back at my career, sort of what's a really good example of um, getting an internal stakeholder who have always viewed as, by the way, my customer, um, to embrace a procurement strategy. So I had been brought in to create a global procurement function at a company where there had been none. It was I would say a greenfield, or at maybe if not a greenfield, it was a very brown field that had long lain fallow. And so I had been brought in to create a procurement team, and had created, I would say, some really good success with, in particular, the IT and operations teams. But as is the case, I think, in a lot of companies, one of the departments that was most reluctant, most standoffish, in fact, pretty much said, "We don't need procurement, go away. We don't need to work with you," was marketing. And I had a pretty good relationship with the chief marketing officer on just a personal level. We got along. We shared, I think, some common background points and that sort of thing. And his team was putting together a big sales kickoff meeting. And the company that they were using pretty much was failing them. His team members that were trying to pull together this thing to bring in, I don't know, 150 people to the south of France. It was everything from, we can't get the hotel, here's an alternative hotel. It was pretty dodgy hotel, as I recall. And it was just one thing after another. And he was telling me these sort of woes. And I said, procurement can help you with this. We're not gonna try to, we don't, you pick your agenda. We're not gonna try to change your agenda. You tell us what you want, and let my team go try to source this for you. And more importantly, let us try to find an external company that can support you, because clearly your team is stretched. They're stretched too thin. We're talking, do you really want to, we were at the time had folks in his team had people in several countries in Europe, but not in France. Do you really want to be flying people back and forth into the south of France, as lovely as that may seem, in preparation for this? Let my team help you. And I think out of maybe duress, he agreed. And we were able to find an events management company that had a very strong presence in France, brought that team on, brought that organization on to work with his team, basically took all of the sourcing of activities of everything from the flights for people coming in from all around the world, to the transportation, buses, the lanyards, everything, no matter big or small. My team said, we will work with this event planning company in support of whatever marketing wants. And the result was what was later described as probably the best internal company global meeting they had ever hosted. And after the meeting, and by the way, came in not exceeding budget at the dates they wanted, sort of was deemed by executive management to be a grand success. Afterwards, the chief marketing officer came to me and said, "Can you help me with this next project we have coming up?" And within about 6 months, the CMO had worked with me to help me get dedicated headcount, basically a marketing category manager and a category team to support his marketing spend on a global basis. So really, as I think back on it, because of that event experience, and then really developing the partnership with with not just the chief marketing officer himself, but now his team, we were able to build a partnership between procurement, now with some almost dedicated resources to support marketing, that as I think back on it, we were able to deliver a pretty significant cost reduction, which to the tune of probably 15 to 20% per year, which by the way gave him more money to spend on other projects, but also were able to really help with being really a support to his team in terms of de-risking some of the marketing activities, being able to provide alternatives for both suppliers as well as help him grow his marketing strategy as there was some global expansion going on. So it really created the springboard for this broader value from procurement that could be provided into a global marketing function. The most common mistakes that I see procurement make is, number one, they try to do things in isolation. They try to operate in isolation, everything from creating their strategy to performing their roles. And they skip the steps of building partnership, creating cross-functional teams, and probably most importantly, they skip change management. It's a great question, and there's sometimes I wished I had a crystal ball, because had you asked me or most people 3 years ago what the future of procurement would look like, I don't know that any of us could have guessed the impact of the pandemic. So I think that but we have learned from that, and that the future of procurement strategy starts, I think, with being agile, with being nimble, with being open to change. If we've learned anything in the last 3 years, it's we have to be open to change, and not just reactively, but proactively. And part of that, I think, requires that companies almost, I guess I'd use the expression, double down on embracing the technological journey, the transformational journey, and meaning continuing to look at what are the best solutions in the marketplace. How do those solutions and which of those solutions can be used to further where each department is on their journey, and how to support the company's goals on that journey. And that means not just what are the right solutions, what's the right technology to do a function, but to also support things like your ESG activities, to support risk management, regulatory compliance, to be both a long range view as well as a safety net for things like supply chain disruption, geopolitical disruption. Technology can be really, it needs to be a wrapper around all of that. And so I think that technology really sits at the core of your strategy as the future strategy, and how do you stay relevant to that future strategy. And then the other thing, and we talked about it in one of the earlier questions, that I think, because it's one of the greatest challenges today, is also one of the greatest opportunities for the future, is how do I, as a leader for procurement, meld technology with the talent that I have and the talent that I need to have, because together that gives me it gives me the momentum, it gives me the power and it gives me um, the energy, the intellectual as well as the functional energy to deliver on my procurement strategy, which absolutely has to be part of and in support of your corporate strategies. And so I think that the long-term future of procurement, by the way, I think it's an amazing future, because if if companies and if leaders embrace talent and technology and can put those together with the right tools to support your departmental objectives, which are in tandem with your corporate objectives, all I can say is, wow, that's going to be an amazing journey that procurement can be really not just supporting in, but leading in. And so I think the future is incredibly bright for procurement. Don't be afraid to fail. It's failure is usually not fatal. To sum it up, um, one of the ways to ensure that you learn from failure when it happens and that you can um, uh, magnify your successes when they happen is to focus on change management, because that gives you the platform to turn failure and missteps into success.